You're not in Kansas anymore, my boy. This is the real world.
I'm a firm believer of out of sight, out of mind, bro.
And corporate sometimes can be like Game of Thrones.
And when they start riling up the troops of who they need to let go, you might be top of mind.
Good dudes, smart dudes, hardworking guys getting passed over by people half as talented, but really good at navigating the workplace.
Mistakes that I made starting a corporate job.
Today, we're talking about navigating 9-to-5 politics and traps in the workplace. Also, avoiding being the invisible employee. It's a problem for young men right now that go invisible in the workplace. You might be this guy, and if you are this guy, stay tuned. You're the guy who works really hard but is constantly overlooked in the workplace. I'm seeing something that's really pissing me off. Good dudes, smart dudes, hardworking guys getting passed over by people half as talented but really good at navigating the workplace. And they have no idea why. A lot of these young guys are confused. And, we talked about it off air. Unfortunately, that's not how corporate works. Corporate is not fair. You're not in Kansas anymore, my boy. This is the real world. And corporate sometimes can be like Game of Thrones. And we're gonna get into that today. We're gonna get into some actionable advice, how you can be better prepared for either getting a new job or surviving and thriving in the job you currently have. Rich, I have a quick question for you. When you were in your first corporate role, what's something that blindsided you that you weren't prepared for? And maybe you didn't learn because you came from where I came from, a place that wasn't so corporate.
Yeah, man. I remember a moment where I was working at a bank and the chief operating officer, the COO, came down to the IT department and just straight up asked us like, hey guys, if your IT manager was no longer around, what would change? And we all froze. We were like,
you're already getting lined up. I can see it.
Yeah. And, we thought about it like it put us in a weird spot because we didn't know the repercussions of our feedback and what that would change. But, we were all honest that we were the hamsters in the wheel. We were the minions. We were the ones sort of running the ship. So if the IT manager wasn't around, nothing would change. And sure enough, bro, 2 weeks later, he was let go. And, we were all sort of blindsided and we were like, damn, the corporate cutthroat. You know what I mean? That was my first taste in like how cutthroat corporate America could really be.
Yeah, listen, I have north of 20 plus stories of going from growing up in an inner city. I'll be honest with you, Rich. I really don't know many people growing up that weren't working construction or some bullshit odd job to make ends meet. And to see me and you graduate from the places we came from into these more corporate jobs, it takes a lot of adjusting that college or school didn't really teach us. And I think that's something you wanted to get into today. Outside of not being the invisible employee that's constantly passed up and no one notices, I thought you had some good points in our pre-show meeting. You were pretty much saying like, Justin, there's so many things that an 18-year-old Rich didn't know about a real official tissue 9-to-5 corporate job that you now would be able to give a lot of incredible advice. For those that don't know, if you want to simplify, what is corporate to you? What does that mean in comparison to like a bullshit job you had before college?
Yeah, I just feel like a corporate job is definitely a more formal setting. It definitely has the path of a career rather than an odd job. There could be potential upward movement. You see yourself potentially getting promoted or the path to a clear career and upward trajectory is clear in that establishment. Obviously, anything Fortune 500, any company over billions in revenue is highly attractive. Yeah, anything that's not fast food is kind of like what comes to mind for me.
You brought up a really good point. I think when I think of a corporate job, I think of a career-driven job, which is what you said, something that you can possibly see yourself doing in the next 5, 10, 15 years that's tied to a very unique skill that you either learned through a trade school, you went out and got a certification online, you went to a smaller school to get really specifically trained in this field. But it's something where you're playing a longer term game. We talk about that a lot, short-term games versus longer term games. And I think the same way they apply in relationships and dating with women, it applies to corporate America. Some exchanges are, give to get, but you don't think you're gonna see this person ever again, so you can play short term. When I think of corporate, I think of you're playing a long-term game, because these people that are involved in this job that you have are all working towards a common goal, and that common goal is tied to wherever the CEO is or wherever the major equity holders are of that company. And they have a mission, they have a number that they have to hit, or they have a goal that they want to get to, and everybody on the team is contributing to that goal. And every department is broken up in some way, shape, or form to that numerical goal or that bigger picture that the CEO or the major stakeholders have. I'm able to dissect that and articulate that now at 39 years old, but when I was 24 entering the workforce, bro, I had no idea what the fuck anybody else did. All I knew was what I was doing. And I think a lot of the ignorance and a lot of selfishness from a lot of younger executives comes from not having a common idea of what everybody else does and what your baby role and how it serves the greater purpose. So when I think of corporate, that's what I think of. You're one part of a larger mission.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I think of this topic, I think of like, man, there were so many sort of mistakes that I made starting a corporate job that I feel like reflecting now at 37 years old would have been wise for me to know. I'll share a funny story. I was in a group of coworkers. We were sort of like in a huddle, and there was a couple managers and senior people in the huddle, and we were all venting about like this one vendor that was sort of not performing. And one of the guys in the group goes, "Yeah, man, can you believe that Ninja?" He said he dropped the N-word in this group.
Yep.
And we were all like, "Yo." like we just froze.
Too comfortable.
And bro, we laughed about it after. We're like, damn, we hope some of the senior people like don't look at him a different way. But I just remember thinking in that moment, like, damn, you have to be able to separate how you talk with your friends outside of work and in the streets, right? Or if you grew up in the projects, right? Like how you interact in the streets is completely different than how you should act in a corporate job. You could be a bank teller, right? Or any corporate formal settings where you have to speak to senior leadership or customers. Like, you can't speak the same. You know what I mean? Like, this dude literally dropped the N-word, and we were like,
I definitely feel that, and I've been blessed and fortunate enough to get into a business that is more in line with how I communicate every day on the day-to-day. Given where I'm at currently in my career, the promotions I've gotten and the very small group of people that do what I do for a living, I have to be able to turn that switch on, and they call it code switching. When you go from speaking your natural, cultural, everyday language, your very chill, relaxed communication style that you have with your brother or your closest friends from high school or college, I don't think that's just limited to urban culture. I think all smaller communities outside of corporate have a natural way of speaking to their friends. And that doesn't always translate. I mean, to your point, it doesn't always translate one-to-one in a good way when you're around people that don't necessarily come from the same world that you come from, or there might be words that you use with your friends that don't necessarily translate the same way in a job. And it's a tricky conversation to have, because I want our community always to practice authenticity and truly know who they are and what they want and find themselves. I don't want to be out here peddling that people got to be fake in order to get what they want. But there is a way you communicate at church. There is a way you communicate at a hospital. There is a way you communicate when you meet your girlfriend's father for the first time. There's nothing inauthentic about presenting yourself in a way that's more normal to a group of people that you don't really know that well. And I think the same things go for a job or a corporate job. You have to be able to communicate in a way that's normal to everybody before you get a little bit more comfortable. So, Rich, I think there's two sections that I want to tackle in this specific episode. And we're going to fulfill our promise that we had earlier in the intro. We will get into actionable advice that will make you a more valuable employee and someone that is not going to get overlooked. We want to keep our community away from being the invisible employee, the guy that's constantly being overlooked, the guy that no one ever pays attention to, but he's really, really smart. And he thinks at least he has all the right answers, and he deserves a little bit more money, at the very least, a little bit more recognition. But I think what's urgent and we need to get through, and I know you have a lot of stories you want to share, Rich, was just mastering 9-to-5 politics and the traps that come with corporate America. One that you told me off air, which I thought was hilarious, was a funny story about HR. And I don't want to speak for you, but the way I understood it was, yo, Justin, HR is not your friend. I learned that the hard way. Now, what do you mean when you say that? Because there could be somebody from HR watching right now. I think we have to explain what their function is to a company and how younger people might have it fucked up as to what they do and why they're not necessarily always on your side.
Yeah, bro. HR is not your friend. They don't I feel like people have this misconception that they have your best interests at heart. I know they're called human resources, but they're really there for the benefit of the company. And I feel like oftentimes you're starting out a job and you're new to the workplace and you think this is a confidential relationship that you could just tell anything to this HR director and it's never going to leave the four walls of that room. I got a rude awakening for you, my boy. That might not always be the case. HR is not your friend. They're your friend to share your 401k benefits and your medical insurance. But outside of like work situations, I would be very cautious about what you tell and then speak to HR about.